Folks, there's new information coming out every single day now, and we're trying our best to help guide people in the way that they should be thinking. By now, we've seen drafts of potential legal agreements that agencies would be signing, as well as announcements of VERA, which completely changes the landscape. And so now the big question with VERA is, can you actually afford to retire a little bit sooner, or in some cases years sooner, than you originally planned and still be financially okay? So I'm going to share with you an example client from our system, and I think it's really going to be helpful for you to see what kinds of things are influential and how you can be thinking. Really, we're going to look at what an early retirement does to their financial plan, and we're also going to review a couple of options that we put together for them to consider doing so that they can leave service right now and feel confident about their retirement plan moving forward. So when this was just a resignation, there was little incentive for people to actually leave. And now with VERA authority backing retirement, there's a large group of federal employees that are seriously considering this, especially if they were already within a few years of retiring anyway. So aside from just resigning, for people who were a little closer to retirement, you really had two options: either an early retirement, like through MRA plus 10, or an early out through VERA. Remember that for an immediate retirement, you need both the age and the number of years in service. So what happens if you do have the minimum retirement age, but you don't quite have the years of service? Well, this is typically where people fall under the MRA plus 10 rules. So this is when you leave service because you're at least minimum retirement age. So for most people, this is 56, 57 years old, somewhere around there. But then what do you do about the fact that you don't quite yet have the amount of years required? Well, you have two choices. Either you take less benefits, either a reduced pension, you may lose health insurance, or you postpone them until a certain age. Now, the latter is what most people do. Now, when do you postpone until? Well, it depends on how many years you actually have. So if we have the age requirement, but not yet the years in service for an immediate retirement, how many years do you have? If you have 10, or rather between 10 and 19, then you're postponing until age 62. And if you have 20 through 29 years, then you're postponing until age 60. 30 years or over obviously makes you immediately eligible under MRA rules, so just keep that in mind. Now, the one thing you want to remember about FEHB is the fact that you want to make sure you're eligible for continuing FEHB. In most cases, this means you have it for at least 5 years, your last 5 years of service, including your last day in service. Now, here's a really big consideration under MRA plus 10. Now, we're going to talk about VERA, and I'm going to show you that scenario in just a second. But bear with me for a second. If you're considering a retirement under MRA plus 10, it's really important that you remember that you do not have what we call the special retirement supplement. So this is your FERS annuity supplement that is typically available between MRA and your age 62, because this is that Social Security light that you would have received up until age 62. Now, of course, this is not a huge amount, but it's something you want to consider, especially if you are leaving work a little sooner than planned, and maybe you could use that extra income. Now, what about a VERA? An early out, or a VERA, brings a totally new set of rules, which can actually be very advantageous here for a lot of people. If you are at least 50 years old and you have 20 years or more of credible service, then you can be qualified for this VERA, which means you're taking an unreduced immediate pension and you get to keep all your benefits. Now, what if you have 25 years of service or more? Any age, folks. So this is something you're going to want to think really carefully about, because technically you can qualify for all of your benefits with an unreduced pension without losing your FEHB that just continues on. But there's a couple of considerations you do want to think about. First, think about FEGLI, so life insurance. This one has similar rules to the other FEHB rules, where it's 5 years that you must be in the program. Again, we're going to have that same set of rules here under the VERA. Now, you may not need life insurance anymore, but consider that if you're the breadwinner or you've got a lot of pension income expected in the family in retirement, what if you die early in retirement? Is the survivor benefit pension going to be enough for your family to still continue living the life that they've grown used to? Okay, so this is where life insurance can be very helpful. So just something to consider. Now, another benefit of VERA is the fact that your special retirement supplement is actually going to be present as well. So this is a nice benefit for anybody that will be leaving a little early. The key here, very important, it will not start until at least 57 years old. Okay, so if you're leaving prior to that, let's say you're 50, 51, 52, something like that, and you're going to take this VERA, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to bridge that gap between then and when your special retirement supplement begins. The other factor that's really important is, what about TSP distributions? Under normal circumstances, 401k type of plans like the TSP, if you separate service 55 or older, you get to access those dollars without penalty, unlike the normal retirement rules, which means you have to be 59 and a half. So you get to access the money a little bit sooner, but not if you leave prior. So if you take the VERA under age 55, you're going to also need to consider, how are you going to bridge that time between then and when you actually have eligibility all the way to 59 and a half to be able to make the withdrawal from the TSP. Super important fact, guys. I cannot stress this enough. You have to understand how these rules work with the IRS. Now, with all of the rules out of the way, what does it actually look like to take an early retirement? Let's look at together what it would actually look like for a family to retire sooner and look at their financial plan together. And the big question we want to answer here is it feasible for them to no longer earn an income years before they thought of stopping? And so what we have here is a duplicate copy of one of our real clients. And so you may remember them from some of our other videos, Mr. and Mrs. Sample client. And so we've got here a federal employee and their spouse working to about age 59, 60 years old. Here is when we have their first year of retirement. And so obviously they've got good growth going on here. They are accumulating aggressively in their retirement accounts, in their brokerage accounts, investing for growth. That's what we like to see prior to retirement. And now over here on the left, we coded in a change that says what would happen to this family if the federal employee were to retire early. In other words, taking that VERA, no longer earning an income immediately. Now, in this case, we also said that the spouse would continue to earn for a little bit longer. But as you can see here, their plan looks pretty strong in the long term. But let's turn on this retirement toggle and see what happens. And boy, there's a pretty big change here in their plan. So obviously, this is no longer a sustainable plan, even though they're retiring looks like about 5 years earlier. And so then the first thing we want to do here is say, okay, well, what are some of the variables that we can start to implement and plan changes so that they can get themselves back on track? First change that we discuss with them, and then we have it reflected here, is some part-time income for a few years. Now, we had originally coded this person in here on the top end of the GS scale. So in this case, we were saying they were earning about half of their salary. So right around $90,000. And we can see here it's just not quite enough if they're earning that half-time salary to really create that long-term success. It does extend their plan a little bit, but we have a pretty deep drop over time. I'm not quite comfortable with this yet. So then we said, well, why don't we just take another look at your investment and withdrawal plan and see if there isn't anything that we can do in there to really stretch out and get the most out of the money that you have saved so far. And so we proposed a couple of changes here to their investment and withdrawal plan. And really, the idea here was to create a series of buckets. The first, we wanted to create a conservative bucket that really allowed them to maximize the income that they were going to get right now. Because listen, if they were going to take the VERA, they're not having an income anymore. They need to be able to meet their short-term expenses. The other one was on the other side of taking a growth approach. If they're retiring sooner, they're going to have inflation-fighting investments for longer so that they can keep replenishing that spending in the long term. And in the one in the middle, that's that moderate bucket. That's kind of a combination between the two, designed to really spread out the risk in the rest of their portfolio and create additional withdrawals for them. So if we turn this toggle on, we can see here there's a huge impact in the long term. And it looks like it's just enough to be able to allow them to take this VERA a little bit sooner than they would have originally anticipated on retiring, but still have that sense of confidence that, hey, we're going to be able to meet our expenses right now, still phase into retirement, and over time, looks like we're actually creating some pretty good value for ourselves by doing these additional things as well. So the key here that I want you to think about, it's really not just one or two things that allow a plan's trajectory to totally change, but rather a combination of things that can give you a better chance of moving your plan in the right direction and having greater confidence. And so for this specific family, we were able to dial in the exact variables. If we were to go in here, you could see those of what it was that was required for this family to be able to do this plan moving forward. So obviously this type of planning can take a little longer to set up and get everything in the system, but the point I'm trying to make to you here is to give you an idea of what kinds of questions you can be thinking and asking yourself and your families as you're having discussion over this next day or two and making this decision together. And truly be thinking about which variables are the ones that you can control in your plan, and start to think about how might this impact us in the long run. So if you enjoy these kinds of videos and you like to see more of this content, make sure you consider subscribing to the channel. We work specifically with federal employees, and the planning that my firm does with federal employees is around the retirement process itself. Okay, we want to help people make smart decisions about their money so that they're getting the most out of their retirement and the years they have left here, okay? So hope this was helpful. Share it with a colleague if you think it was. And until next time, stay wise and stay wealthy.